was to keep the stakeholders, quote unquote, their money out of Republican coffers for the 2010 election. We saw a very angry letter written by John Boehner to Billy Townsend, the head of Pharma, saying, why are you supporting the Democrats here? Why aren't you joining us to basically have a Republican resurgence in 2010 to make sure that there is no health care reform that doesn't substantially benefit you? So that was the goal. That was the number one purpose that the White House really set itself to in negotiating these deals. If you'll recall, in 1994, there was a huge swing after health reform failed during the Clinton administration from Democrats to Republicans in the House, a 54-seat swing, and control of the House went to Republicans. The conclusion that was drawn from that is that we can't do anything that will put the quote-unquote more conservative members of the House in danger by having them vote for this socialist public plan. They seem to selectively forget that NAFTA had been passed just before the 1994 election, which suppressed the Democratic base. And during a midterm election, in the first term of a president, there are always going to be seats lost, and people just aren't going to show up as much on the Democratic side. But what they did then and what they're anticipating doing now is doing something that is very, very affecting to the Democratic base. And I think that they've made a serious miscalculation electorally as well as morally. But that seems to be where they're at, and they have whipped blue dog votes, conservative Democratic votes in the House by saying that there will be no public option. So they've got to deliver on that now.
And the power of Harry Reid, the role, the next steps that you see?
Well, that is actually kind of interesting this morning because there are two bills coming out of the Senate. One of them is the Senate Finance Committee bill, which, as we know, passed yesterday without a public plan. And the other bill came out of the Help Committee, Chris Dodd's Help Committee, earlier this year. And the Help Committee bill does have a public option. So Harry Reid gets to decide whether the bill that goes to the Senate floor has one or doesn't. Now, he has been saying that there weren't the 60 votes. Again, this is back to this silent filibuster that the conservative Democrats, members of the Democratic caucus, Joe Lieberman, are conducting. They won't come out in public and say that they will join with the Republicans in an unprecedented filibuster to keep this legislation from getting an up or down vote. But they seem to be whispering this in the Senate cloakrooms. Therefore, Harry Reid has concluded that this bill must make everybody, including Olympia Snowe, happy. And that means no public option. But we know that there are 51 votes for Chuck Schumer's level playing field public option. And last night, Chuck Schumer went on the Rachel Maddow show and said that it's up to Harry Reid, and if he brings a public option to the floor in a final combined bill, that there will be one coming out of the Senate. So he's put it all on Reid, and that's where it belongs. Harry Reid's decision, he can't pass it off to anybody else, though he has tried, to the White House and to other members of the Senate. It's Harry Reid's and Harry Reid's decision alone as to whether he takes the Senate Finance Committee help bill, which has co-ops, or the Senate Help Committee bill, which has a public plan when he merges them into the bill that goes to the floor.
And Jane Hamsher, can you talk about what you expect from the House? There's much more support there for the public option. And what do you expect the final shape of the legislation will look like?
Well, they're in a debate right now as to what the final bill will look like. There are three committees that delivered bills in the House. The third, the Energy and Commerce Committee bill, is much more blue dog friendly. They held it hostage for 10 days, as Mike Ross likes to say. And they took out the ability for a public plan to be based on Medicare rates. And Medicare rates very much keep the cost of the bill down. I believe that the CBO told Nancy Pelosi that $85 billion would be saved over the next 10 years if the public plan were based on Medicare rates. Now, they're not talking about that anymore, but they are talking about Medicare plus 5%, which would still be a very powerful cost control measure. And the problem we get into is that if you start raising the rates that get paid, as we believe was negotiated in the deals with the hospitals and the AMA, you start in a bill that has to raise the revenue and be deficit neutral for anything you spend, you start cutting the amount of money that's available for subsidies, and you start cutting the number of people who will actually see health care coverage for themselves with this bill. So the House, the progressive members of the House are fighting very hard to keep Medicare plus 5% in. But again, President Lieberman and President Snowe have said that they don't support this, and we're now just assuming that they get to say what goes in the Senate bill.
Well, Jane Hamsher, I want to thank you very much for being with us. Jane Hamsher is founder of Firedoglake, speaking to us from Washington, D.C. Of course, we'll continue to cover this issue every day. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. Back in a minute. Dax Johnson, ruler of one. Here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with